Maybe this is because of the thoughts that they will never meet again, because the other girls are completely different from her, because rare things are valuable regardless of their actual cost, and some are even priceless. She calls someone a fat badger, but she herself looks like a joyful foal, full of strength and energy. Laliella sat down by the fountain and said that today she would read to them a story about a brave knight who defeated a dragon. Watching her, the Duke wondered how it was possible to make so many grimaces. But now everything became clear. It seems she hones her skills by reading books to children, and without noticing it, she trains her facial expressions. At that very second, a tearful boy came up to her and said that he was scared. Laliella called Lala over to her. She hugged him and said that everything was fine, at which time the girl standing next to him enviously asked him to hug her too. Meanwhile, Kais carefully examined the girl, paying attention to her lips, which is why he immediately blushed. He didn't realize that he was staring at all, but she was actually different from the usual ones apparently, and entertaining to watch. The guy pulled his shirt aside, wondering why it was so hot, but his gaze continued to follow the blonde. Unable to bear it, he sat down under the window, trying to curb his feelings. But this was difficult for him. Last night, a suspicious stranger in a knight's uniform stepped onto the lands of Folar and stared at the lady from the second floor. Anyone would have thought him strange, and he hoped that she did not recognize him, when suddenly the Duke found himself aroused. He couldn't believe his eyes, after which he stood up, trying to figure out what else this was and what was happening to him. It was difficult to realize that this had happened while he was looking at such a picture that could not fit into his head. However, now he couldn't calm down, although this happens to him sometimes. But it's quite natural, because no one aroused such desire in him, although there were many women who tried to seduce him. Nevertheless, he lived peacefully without any problems. But now this was something completely different that he had not encountered. Kais continued to ask himself how this could happen just by looking at this ordinary woman. The Duke understood that nothing could be done about it, apparently, all because he had not done this for quite a long time. The guy listened as the girl said that the knight, having met a ferocious dragon, tightly grasped the hilt of a huge sword. The Duke was on the verge, while Laliella said that the knight began to swing faster and moved very quickly. No one even saw the hands gripping the sword. And then the knight gathered all his strength and pierced the dragon's heart. When the guy reached his peak, he thought that it had never happened so quickly and never felt so good. Meanwhile, Laliella continued to say that the dragon roared loudly and fell lifeless next to the knight. At that very moment, Case began to ask if he had gone completely mad, after which he ordered the dragon to die, but to no avail. At the same time, other children asked Voklan where the knights were going, because they were of high position. The guy answered with a smile that in Folar, the children were surprised, asking why they needed to go to this small village. Voklan replied that he didn't know, but the guys conspiratorially thought that this was clearly some kind of secret mission. At that same second, Kais came down the stairs, declaring that they were returning. Upon hearing this, the brother was in complete shock. After all, they came because of some business of his, but they immediately returned, after which they asked why he was wrapped in rags. A week later, after the Duke returned again, Voklan asked with dissatisfaction whether he had gone to Folar again. This was already the 6th time, and since he's traveling, something needs to be done, because what's the point if he sits in a hotel all day? Suddenly, with horror in his voice, he asked if he had accidentally fallen in love with one of those waiter twins. After that, he began to ask which of them, the eldest or the youngest, but he asked Voklan to shut up, because his head was cracking. The guy asked not to even dare to complain, since he and Wallace were already on the verge and did not understand what was wrong with him. He would have returned at least before the imperial ball. It was in honor of the princess's coming of age, but they couldn't even contact him. The emperor even sent someone to check, which is why he and Wallace were quite scared. But, apparently, in vain. They apparently assumed that he didn't come, because he didn't want to get involved with the princess, which made her very upset. After this, Voklan asked if the Duke knew what rumors were circulating about him. Kais indifferently decided to inquire. The brother explained that everyone says that he definitely likes the man, and even that they have a secret affair with you, and this is unpleasant. Now not only will Elmano's family not get engaged to anyone, but he will also have to forget about marriage due to his fault. With a straight face, Kay said that this was great, because this was exactly what the wave was trying to achieve, which means the plan worked. Vauclin, dumbfounded, asked if he really liked him, but the Duke did not answer anything, pressing the bell. At that same second, Wallace entered the office, after which Case ordered him to prepare a chest made of a huge and strong ash tree. He remembered Laliella's words that she wanted her chosen one to send a chest made of ash and feldspar. The Duke ordered each corner to be filled with feldspar decorations and filled with gold, leaving no free space. The butler did not understand why the Duke decided to order this, but he could not refuse even such a strange idea. Then Kais turned to his brother, asking him to personally deliver this chest along with a detachment of knights to the lands of Folar. Vauclin asked him to hold his horses, and with a frown asked if he really had something with the twins. He was still interested in whether it was with the elder or the younger, after which he asked to be honest, because he would understand everything. Kais ignored him, handing over the letter and asking him to play not at the hotel, but straight to the estate of Baron Folar. The guy explained that he needed to give his sister, Laliella Folar, this chest of gold and a letter asking for an engagement. After the order was carried out, Laliella, along with her brother, studied the contents of the letter from the Duke with surprise. Looking at the serious convoy, the girl could not believe that all this was happening to her, but she needed time to think. A month later, Wallace walked into the Duke's office, saying that it was time to go, because the strip had already crossed the drawbridge. The butler showed thumbs up, saying that he looked beautiful today. Kais did not answer anything to this. As he went down the stairs, he thought that he was visiting the lands of Folar to check whether his feelings were an accident. And after the 6th check, he had no choice but to admit this fact, which he would never have believed. He has never been interested in any woman, but he is attracted to Laliella Folar, and extremely strongly. And when he first saw her very close, when the girl got out of the carriage, the Duke was truly fascinated by her. He extended his hand to her, thinking that this was already dangerous, because this was the first time he had touched someone whom he had been watching from the sidelines for so long. Suddenly, the girl stumbled, but the Duke reacted instantly, realizing that he could not let her fall. When he first held her in his arms, Laliella instantly blushed, smilingly thanking the Duke for saving her. Kies did not answer, as he was overwhelmed with emotion, and words of danger echoed in his head. Taking a step back, the man waved his hand, welcoming the girl to Elmano Castle, her new home, with a smile. In response to this, Laliella curtsied, greeting the Duke with a smile, after which she politely introduced herself to him. It was a very late acquaintance, but they both hoped that their relationship would only grow stronger with each new day. A few days later, the Duke looked out the window, noticing Laliella in the garden, and asked Wallace what she was doing there. The man replied that he was filling a flower pot with soil. She asked where the light fell most, and he showed this place. The guy was surprised by the lady who does not collect bouquets or paint flowers, but digs the ground and plants seeds on her own. Then he asked himself what would happen if he came and pulled her towards him, and then kissed those plump scarlet lips. How will she react if he buries his face in that snow-white chest and neck, and bites her like an insatiable man? It was the right decision to send Laliella to a separate building, although it is annoying. But Wallace was wise. He said that since ancient times in Vajaraman, absolute purity and innocence have been valued for weddings, so this is necessary. Otherwise, he would not have been able to contain his excitement and would have committed unacceptable rudeness by loitering in front of her room. 2 months later, people said that the head of the family with the deepest history would marry so soon and suddenly. Many have heard that he immediately brought the bride to the estate to teach social etiquette, because she is from a provincial family. Surely the Duke made such a decision because something was wrong with him, but no one could answer what exactly. Some said that there was a high probability that he was a eunuch. This fact literally drove many to laughter. Caius, who heard everything perfectly, thought that they were having so much fun and thought that they could not be heard, although this was not the case. His only regret was that Laliella also had to hear similar words about his future husband right now. But these rumors will soon disappear. After these thoughts, he sat down on one knee and kissed her hand, making her blush. That evening, the Duke stood in front of the stairs, thinking that it would be the first time since he had inherited the title that he would go up there. This was the Duke and Duchess's room on the third floor, the largest and most luxurious room in the Elmano castle. It had the best view, but at the same time, it was where my father spent most of his time with so many women. And this is also the room of his mother, who could not leave it because of the pride of an aristocrat, so she slowly faded away in it. Standing in front of her and grabbing the handle, the Duke thought that he was being physically torn away from her. It was very hard for him. But when the guy entered, he heard a girl's scream, after which he realized that he forgot to knock, acting impolitely. At that very second he blushed, noticing at first the rather transparent nightie the girl was wearing. After that, he looked at her embarrassed face and strange pose, since she did not know what to do with herself in this situation. While the girl tried to cover herself, the Duke thought that he had often imagined Laliella naked, but now everything was different. This exceeded all his expectations, and every inch of her body was too beautiful. But for some reason, he suddenly began to feel sick. He had been waiting for this for so long, and now in front of him was a naked body that he had imagined in his head hundreds of times. Now he can kiss and bite every inch of him as much as he wants, without worrying about other people's opinions. But because of the too strong aroma that envelops the entire room, my head is spinning, my body is heavy, and I feel discomfort. This is similar to the sensations that overcome him in front of annoying women, and now they have come at the wrong time. And now she looks straight at him with an embarrassed look, waiting for him to take his step before their wedding night. The Duke did not understand why exactly now these sensations decided to overshadow his head, but he tried to overcome them. When he kissed her, he reached the peak, deciding that he could not, after which he wished the girl good night and went to bed. The hope that this was due to excitement eventually turned into despair that he could not share. He ignored the rumors and thought he could handle them, but because of his arrogance, they spread even more. Vauquelin is advised to discuss this topic with Laliella, but he does not want to see this facial expression full of melancholy and sadness. When he was walking through the garden and was busy with his thoughts, he froze in surprise when Lali turned to him. The guy turned his head in her direction, but could not utter a word, and the girl said that she wanted to tell him something. A few hours earlier, Marie had brought a newspaper to Madame while she was busy reading books and writing various letters. Suddenly, the girl jumped up from her seat and said that she wouldn't do that, explaining that she needed to talk to the Duke personally. They didn't spend the first night, but he at least came to the bedroom. But after his escape, he hasn't appeared there for the 5th day. Laliella was very worried about this, but still cannot understand what prompted his behavior. The maid remembered that she saw him hiding, but always remained far away, so as not to catch the mistress's eye. All these days, Laliella tried to understand the reason, but her side was unsuccessful, and did not even move a single step. She wanted to quench her curiosity and went to the library, even found old news that concerned Kai's. No matter how hard she searched, there was only basic information about Elmano's family, but nothing about him specifically. And then the thought struck the girl that they should therefore discuss such issues like a real family. If you think about it, they didn't even really have conversations, since the Duke was too taciturn and always preferred to remain silent. And it's difficult for her to understand him, coming from high society, although she always tried to look and behave amazingly. But what could be more difficult in such a situation is that my brother and Mulina always talked when a conflict arose. When she decided to talk to her husband, she immediately noticed Vauquelin, who was thoughtfully going about his business. Seeing the girl, the guy immediately said hello. She reciprocated, saying that they had not seen each other for a long time. Vauquelin asked with a smile if she had come to see the Duke, adding that he was not in his office at the moment. The guy good-naturedly explained that he had gone out for a walk in the garden, and if she didn't mind, then he could accompany her. When they went to Vauquelin, that they were talking for the first time after the wedding, the girl clarified that he was all about business. The guy explained that due to the rush to organize the ceremony, he was busy with all the affairs of the Duke, and he did not have time. And it was very annoying that they were forced to go to the property inspection without having time to really enjoy the banquet. Laliella replied that they all did a great job. Vauquelin was flattered by her words, but the Duke was only taking advantage of him. The girl said with open interest that he was probably close to the Duke, since he was his cousin. The guy agreed, adding that they had been close since he inherited the title, but if she was interested in something, she could ask. Laliella had too many questions, but could she ask them if she was now only half his wife? The girl said that during the ball, the Duke was constantly surrounded by people. Because he is very handsome and popular, Vauquelin assumed that she was asking her mistress, answering that aristocrats are always surrounded by many people. But the Duke hates secular society. He is popular, but people irritate him, and he irritates him even more. He especially cannot tolerate those who pursue their own selfish goals and do not even smile next to attractive ladies. Laliella blushed and agreed with him, adding that she had never seen him smile, no matter how much she looked at him. Vauquelin wanted to ask more about this, but the girl abruptly interrupted him, saying that she had found the Duke. Kai stood in the distance, so Lali hurried to him, telling Vauquelin that she really enjoyed talking with him. At this time, the Duke's brother began to think that he was so incapable of expressing his emotions, although he used to smile a lot. The girl came up to her husband, saying that she wanted to say something, but she didn't know where to start the conversation. Confused, she began gesturing with her hands, saying that she would really like to have a tea party at the estate. Everyone is waiting for the Duchess's first reception, but she postponed it because she was not mentally ready, but she was late. The guy realized that she was putting it off because the first night had gone wrong because of him, and he was the only one to blame for it. Why did he answer that she could do as she wanted? With a smile on her face, the girl sincerely thanked him. Kais decided to break the silence by asking what she did while she was in Foler, although he already knew that very well. The girl began to say that she sometimes rode horses, grew plants with her nanny, but mostly read books. She and Mayulina lay in the shade of a tree and then had dinner together. Lali did not notice how a smile appeared on her face. The Duke watched her in surprise, although his face did not express any emotion, but he felt warm next to her. The more he hears about her peaceful life in Foler, the more ashamed he becomes of wanting to make her happier than anyone else. With his greed, he robbed Laliella of her happiness in the person of Lonaes and Mulina, who had been with her all her life. Meanwhile, the girl was in high spirits. I think this was the first time she had talked with the Duke for such a long time. However, she can't tell from his face, but it seems that the problem will be easier to solve than she thought, which is good. Then the girl asked what his childhood was like. Because the estate is so large, he probably did a lot of things. At that same second, Kais's face darkened, after which he replied that, unlike her, he had nothing special to remember. He then walked away from her that the wind was very cold today, so she had better go inside to avoid getting sick. After that, he headed off, leaving the girl alone to wonder what caused his sudden change of mood. That evening, Laliella was soaking in the bathtub when she heard Marie say that she had sent invitations to a tea party. Tomorrow, they should also deliver gifts for noble ladies. Hearing this, the girl thanked her faithful maid. Looking at her in surprise, Laliella asked if she had changed the oil again, and she in turn looked at the jar. She could not answer the truth, because the butler forces her to lie to the lady, since it was the Duke's request. Marie, with a smile on her face, stated that this lavender oil with other herbs was said to be great for calming the nerves. However, this did not particularly please the girl, who sadly lowered her gaze and asked if this oil changed anything. The maid explained that this was not for the sake of the first night. She was just so tired lately that she was falling off her feet. Out of curiosity, Laliella asked if Marie knew why she got married. I hope she suddenly has an answer. The smile disappeared from the maid's face, as she replied that she had said that it would be difficult to refuse such an offer. Lali said that at first it was like that. She agreed because there was no other choice, although everyone was worried. They thought that the Duke needed a wife for show, but the strangest thing is that over time she was filled with expectations. She knows that love at first sight only happens in novels, but she hoped that something similar would happen to her. It would be wonderful if such a stunning person suddenly fell in love with her for such a fleeting meeting. In addition, she wanted to experience the same love as her parents and brother had with Mulina, which was stronger than steel. And she thought that it would be like if the Duke fell in love with her first, because it would be even more romantic. She set off together long before the wedding, and along the way she constantly imagined the face of the Duke, whom she had seen only once. And, having met the Duke from her dreams, she fell in love first, like a fool, but he turned out to be not in love with her. Meanwhile, the doctor told the Duke that he was in perfect health, but suspected that the whole problem was in his nerves. After all, if a man is very nervous, he will not be able to enjoy the night, so he should rest and calm down. After this, the Duke kicked him out. While Wallace asked the frightened doctor to keep it a secret, he agreed. The dissatisfied Kais said that the butler said that he was from a family of court doctors. But this is the third time he has heard the same thing. With the same success, he kicked out the first and second doctor, driving them out of the estate. The upset Wallace only asked for forgiveness. According to doctors' recommendations, he took herbs, which were supposed to help stabilize his mental and physical condition. And he even lay on a soft bed all day so that his body could rest, and asked the maid Lale to constantly change the oils. Although he understood that it was quite rude for a man to interfere in a woman's toilet, especially without her knowledge, but now it is more important to find out the reason for this incomprehensible situation and not to watch your manners. Otherwise, it may only get worse. But, contrary to his expectations, it did not get better, which is why the Duke became more and more irritable, unable to find a place for himself. However, the biggest problem was that his problem disappeared when he watched Laliella from the side. Just by looking at the back of her head, he remembers her smooth, naked body, and everything below awakens again. Kais had already tested this several times by watching the girl as she went about her daily activities. However, once he hears her chatting with the maid, he can't help himself because of the desire. He even lost his appetite because he did it again and again. One day the Duke could not restrain himself and called himself a psycho. He physically cannot help but kiss her, not really hug her, and, not wanting to appear to his wife like this, he began to avoid her. Meanwhile, Wallace had been watching the gentleman for a long time, but had not seen him in such a critical condition for a long time. An outstanding young head of the family, who returned the entire fortune of the family and raised it to its feet in an incredibly short time. Perhaps due to what he experienced at an early age, he could not shake off the anxiety of trying to gain acceptance. Kais did not trust anyone and suspected everyone, which led to this state. But the butler did not want to remain silent. He decided to allow himself too much, but suggested that he simply tell everything to the lady, and this problem could be solved by conversation. However, the Duke sharply rejected this idea, explaining that this only happens with normal couples, but not with them. The guy realized that he was in too much of a hurry from the very beginning. He should have at least met her once or twice more. He made the mistake of acting impulsively, but even that didn't really work out, which is why he now has to suffer. He sent her the chest full of gold that she talked about, but in the end, it turns out that this is a marriage built on status and wealth. Some people think that she married for wealth and fame and mock her, but he can't keep her. If she found out about this terrible problem, she would regret the marriage like his mother, and he would really not want that. And now the Duke was faced with a task that seemed impossible to solve, but he had to find a way out. It better be a curse to wipe out the man who was once called his father. At that very moment, Kais turned to Wallace and asked to call the priest. Perhaps he could solve this problem. The next morning, Laliella once again woke up alone, not noticing the Duke next to her. She was very excited because today was the dummy Duchess's first tea party. She immediately remembered the words of the governess, who said that at least one of her duties was worth performing properly. Madame Desviri personally recommended only 7 noble ladies with the greatest influence in secular society. She said that everyone would be a huge support for her, but of course they are close to her, so they made concessions to her. The girl tried to gather her strength, thinking that she couldn't lose heart, and she had to succeed in spite of everyone. To achieve this, she prepared immaculate cups, neat treats, and the perfect arrangement of flowers in the room. Carefully double-checking everything, the Duchess noticed that the gifts for the guests were also ready, which meant that everything was perfect. After that, she sat down at the table and put her head in her hands, while Marie asked her if it was hard for her now. She replied that there was so much to do just for one tea party. It was unclear how society ladies cope with so much trouble. The maid understood everything, but asked her to get up. Otherwise, she would ruin her makeup, and she would have to do it all over again. Looking out the window, she thought that you definitely wouldn't see anything like this in Fowler, when suddenly the head maid called out to her, holding it under her breath in her hand. The woman with a dissatisfied expression declared that these were gifts for guests prepared from the Duke. Looking at the rich and very expensive jewelry, Laliella stated that she had already prepared all the necessary gifts. The maids replied that it seemed that he decided that this was not enough, because it was very strange to give just glass glasses. Marie explained that these were top-quality crystal wine glasses, custom-made by a renowned craftsman. The woman asked how such a commoner could understand this, and for her, they were no different from glasses in the kitchen. Their argument was interrupted by Laliella, who asked the head maid if the Duke personally said that her gifts were not enough. The woman became agitated for a moment, explaining that, looking at him, she simply got that impression. This seemed strange to the girl, because he is not that kind of person at all, but later she would personally ask him what exactly was missing. After this, the Duchess sent the maid away, until she answered with a dissatisfied look that she was about to leave. The maid mentally asked her what she could do, since she hadn't even spent the night with him, although she dared to boast about her position. While Marie watched her leave with an angry look, Laliella thought that this was most likely just a formality. Meanwhile, the Duke, who was in a neighboring building, said dissatisfiedly that because of the flowers, nothing could be seen. He was suddenly startled when Wallace entered and announced that the priest had arrived and was waiting for him in the living room on the second floor. After that, the guy headed towards the exit, but suddenly stopped and asked the butler if he had handed over the gifts. The man answered in the affirmative, explaining that he did this through the head maid, after which he offered to check. Kais immediately abandoned this idea, since he knew that his faithful butler could not let him down in such a delicate matter. Wallace added that the ladies will have a good impression of the first meeting, and they will definitely support the lady. Turning his head away in embarrassment, the Duke agreed with him, while the butler thought that it would be worth hurrying just with this. As soon as they arrived in the living room, they were immediately greeted by a blond guy dressed in priest's robes. The young guest said that he had heard that the Duke had summoned someone who had knowledge of magic and various curses. Hearing an affirmative answer, the priest decided to ask if he could find out the reason for the Duke's interest. Kais replied that he could not tell, otherwise rumors would spread that Elmano called the priest for a stupid reason. After that, he politely asked him to just check if there were any traces of some kind of curse or spell on him. Without further questions, the priest agreed, after which he prepared everything necessary to perform a special ceremony. A few minutes later, he announced that he was wearing nothing. With a dissatisfied look, the Duke replied that this was very good. The guy turned to him, saying that priests are obliged to listen to believers. Everyone has their own stories, but there is something in common. If these torments are not due to a curse or illness, then in most cases the soul suffers, although it cannot be seen or understood. But if this is ignored, the result will be an explosion, and perhaps he has forgotten about some knife or wound in his soul. After all, sometimes old wounds are stronger than curses. At that very second, the Duke began to think, trying to remember what he had forgotten. When the priest left the room, Kais immediately turned to Wallace, who immediately flinched. Coming closer to him, the Duke said that usually he is always calm, but today he is completely different, which is not like him. The butler began to behave this way ever since he heard the last words of the priest about some burden on his soul. Without changing his facial expression, Kais decided to ask directly if he was hiding something from him that he should not know. The butler immediately became agitated and hesitated, nervously answering the gentleman that he was not hiding anything special from him. The Duke displeasedly declared that he would decide for himself whether he was special or not, after which he asked if he had forgotten that he was his master. Wallace said it happened while Mr. Drake was living here, and someone committed suicide on the estate. Meanwhile, the noble ladies who arrived at the estate said that it was an honor for them to receive the invitation of the Duchess. A little worried, Laliella greeted them, nervously thinking that her facial muscles were about to cramp from smiling. One of the girls said that the hostess had not been in the residence for so long that she could not come here even with all her desire. Another said that even at the wedding, she thought that the Duke had excellent taste, and today she also looks great. They began to shout, and then that the Duke was lucky to find such a beauty, as if she had just stepped out of a painting. When they sat down at the table, one of the girls said that she had heard that the new villa of the Marquis de Vers was very luxurious. When asked to give a tour, Another replied that she would definitely send out invitations to everyone as soon as possible. Among the guests, Laliella noticed Tam, the wife of the Marquis of de Vers, the wife of Count Castor, and the wife of Count Tavarnel. She tried to remember them for so long, but they all cover their mouths with the same gesture and even laugh in the same tone. It was hard for her to recognize them, although everyone is talking so actively, but in fact they don't even really listen to each other. Some talked about the salon, where new dresses had been delivered, while others talked about the siege and the pleasant aroma of tea. For Laliella, this is somewhat reminiscent of their half-asleep conversations with Mulina, but at the same time, they are radically different. By the fact that they have the greatest influence in social circles, it was meant that they are the most talkative. Suddenly, Devers's wife asked with interest why the wife of the Marquis de Marquis had not received an invitation. Another girl answered, instead of Laliella, that the Duchess probably doesn't know, but she also recently got married. The third immediately took up the conversation, asking if they were talking about Lady Aretta. Laliella thought that she had already heard about her, when I suddenly remembered that Madame de Viry and the headmaid were talking about her, and she was one of the Duke's mistresses. One of the girls said that even though she has now become the fifth wife of the Marquise, before she was called the flower of the secular world. She and the Duke were often dance partners and were seen together many times, so this is a definite fact. Suddenly, Laliella's hands began to tremble as she thought that she had decided not to believe the rumors about him until she was sure herself. At that very moment, Marie apologized to her mistress for taking up her precious time, but she needed to look at something. One of the guests said with a smile that there seemed to be an urgent matter, and this made Laliella worry. Devers's wife asked him with a smile not to worry about them and to quickly go and solve the problem. The other girls echoed her that there was plenty of time, and they could still have fun themselves, and she didn't need to rush. The Duchess stood up from her seat, after which she asked the guests for forgiveness for such a sudden absence. The guests saw her off with a smile, but the further she went, the faster the friendly smiles disappeared from their faces. A couple of minutes later, Laliella saw a broken glass, which was a gift for the guests. She asked how it happened. Marie explained that the maid was cleaning here and accidentally broke a glass, after which she began to ask what to do. The maid decided to hope for the understanding of one of the ladies and say that they would order a new one and send it to her estate. Laliella immediately abandoned this idea, explaining that choosing someone was not the best option, and she had a better idea. It's better to say that the gifts have not yet arrived. They will send everything at once when they receive a new glass, and no one will be deprived. Looking at the table, the Duchess thought that, fortunately, she could calmly give the Duke's gifts instead of her own. To catch her breath a little, she went out onto the balcony, enjoying the pleasant weather and the gentle breeze. The girl thought that she needed to hold out for a few more hours. Now she would rest a little and then return. At least everything is fine. Until the laughter dies down, it doesn't really matter whether she's there or not. When Laliella thought that it was much calmer here, she suddenly heard someone calling her the poor Duchess. They discussed with the girl that no matter how much she wanted, she would not be able to do this, and that there was no hope at all in the future. Laliella turned her head in their direction with interest, trying to understand what they were talking about, but it was hard to hear. She heard fragments of phrases about how her wife didn't look very good. They were newlyweds, but they couldn't even do it. Frowning, the Duchess realized that they were talking about her, and that she must be very worried about this. When someone said that the Duchess was extremely worried because she wanted it very much, Laliella immediately blushed. The girl's hands began to tremble again, followed by her whole body as she tried to comprehend what they were saying about her. The guests continued to say that she took a bath for several hours, burned incense, changed the bed, and put on linen. Although this is typical for mistresses, she creates a fuss every day, which exhausts the maids to death. And they wastefully pour only expensive oils into the bath. They say the persistent aroma makes it impossible to breathe. But nothing can be done about it. They say that she is going to give up and take a lover, despite the marriage. At that very second, the Duchess realized that the most influential noble ladies knew about the unsuccessful first nights and about her efforts. Then she wondered who was talking. Perhaps it was the maids or Madame de Viry, or the headmaid who despised her. Perhaps it could have been everyone in this house, since almost no one considered her the mistress of the house and the Duchess. Their glances were not friendly, but she could not even imagine that they would mock so openly. One of the girls said that it was her own fault, because she sat in her wilderness and didn't even poke her nose into secular society. And suddenly, she dared to accept the Duke's offer, and didn't even question it. In the end, she would be a widow with her husband alive. All these people called the Duke arrogant, because he rejected so many society ladies and chose a hillbilly. Lali did not understand what was wrong with her family, because her grandfather was an outstanding scientist, and he was entrusted with teaching the imperial family. Her family, who never harmed anyone and managed the lands wisely, suddenly became the subject of all sorts of conversations. And now she is suffering such terrible treatment, and all because of her marriage to Duke Elmano, which is not even entirely logical. They were in an even worse situation than if she had refused him, but she didn't understand what Duke's problem they were talking about. Suddenly, Devers's wife said that this marriage only confirmed everything, but Laliella did not understand what she meant. She added that it was strange that the young man, capable of getting anyone, did not touch a single woman. The Duchess assumed that they were hinting that he really had a mistress, but there was no evidence. Another guest sadly said that she still believed that he was simply keeping his purity for his chosen one. The interlocutor asked where she had seen a young duke who would do such a thing, adding that such a thing does not happen. The girls laughed when they suggested that Duke Elmano was also protecting himself from his only wife. Laliella thought that he might have a mistress, but who knew that he would neglect his wife so much? When tears welled up in her eyes, she thought what she should do now. I don't want to spend my whole life like a puppet. Meanwhile, the girls continued to say with a smile that they still felt sorry for the Duke, even though he was not perfect in everything. With such a height, face, and figure, being a eunuch is very terrible. Hearing this sent a shiver down the Duchess's spine. Laliella couldn't believe that the reason why he couldn't even hug her was not because of his secret mistress, but because he was a eunuch. Meanwhile, the Duke sat in his study with a glass of wine, remembering Wallace's words about committing suicide because of Mr. Drake. Kais instantly became gloomy, trying to imagine how many such incidents had happened during the years of his father's life in this estate. The guy remembered that Drake abused the wife of a knight loyal to their family while he was away from home for a long time. He pursued the daughter of a bankrupt aristocrat, promising to make him his second wife, and then abandoned her to the mercy of fate. As a result, one of the victims committed suicide, and Drake paid his family and sent them abroad to apologize. The Duke then stated that the butler initially said that he got rid of everything connected with Drake, but kept silent about it. Wallace asked for forgiveness, after which he said that we were talking about the daughter of the nanny who raised him. This surprised Kais. The Duke could not compare the facts, so he clarified whether he was talking about Gladys, to which he received an affirmative answer. The guy said that this couldn't be, because he remembered the nanny, who was always kind to him, and her daughter Gladys. They were so close that he wished they weren't the same family, and he always smiled when he was around them. The colder his mother treated him, and the more chaotic his life became, the more he relied on these two. Kais remembered that Gladys said that she wanted to get married. He definitely gave her money and a house as a dowry. When asked when this happened, Wallace replied that Miss Gladys did not marry or leave the estate. After this, the man explained that this happened before he became Duke. Such information stunned Kais. With a worried look, the Duke asked why he did not know this then, since such an event could not pass him by. The butler replied that he was the one who first discovered the corpse hanging in front of the matrimonial bedroom. Kais couldn't believe his ears, because if it were true, he would definitely remember it, but his memory was empty. Wallace said that due to the shock he fainted and did not come to his senses for a long time, and after waking up, he did not remember anything. Kais began to ask if his current memories were wrong and how this could even happen to him. The butler replied that he did not know the details, he only knew how, the day before, Mr. Drake brought her to the bedroom. When asked if Drake abused Gladys, the butler replied that he was not aware of the details, and Vaklan knew the rest. This information once again stunned the Duke, until Wallace explained that the gentleman was then staying at the estate. And it was he who then investigated this case, but did not tell anyone about it, so it is better to find out about everything from him. At that very second, Kais was filled with anger as he asked himself how he could forget this, and what even happened to him. Meanwhile, Laliella was sitting on the sofa and thought that she did not remember how the tea party ended and how she saw off the guests. They left with smiles on their faces, as if they weren't slandering her, and thus they completely ruined her mood for the whole day. The girl decided that she no longer wanted to be associated with them and hoped that she would never meet these houses again. She remembered how they said that if a man is not interested in women, and not obvious ones, then he is definitely a homosexual. Another added that men cannot curb their desire, no matter how hard they try to hide it or lie. Even if in old age the sand is already falling off from them, they will still look for ways to achieve the same thing, no matter what. Even looking at the elderly Marquis de Marquise, he can barely stand on his feet, and he took the young and beautiful Lady Lamona as his wife. Laliella clearly remembered the words that a man cannot curb his desire, no matter how hard he tries. However, now she understands what that expression is on his face, and can partly understand what this man is experiencing. The Duke probably regrets that he burdens her, although she tries so hard to do everything to please him. The Duchess also recalled how one guest asked whether Lady Lamona's words about him being a eunuch were true. Dever's wife confirmed this, because she told her about it herself, and also said that she saw it with her own eyes. Then there were rumors about their imminent wedding, but she never received a letter with the proposal. The lady became more and more worried. Over time, fewer letters began to arrive from other gentlemen from the nobility, which greatly upset her. Then, the excited lady decided to sneak into the Duke's chambers at night, and when he fell asleep, she brazenly pulled off his pants. And it wasn't what it should have been. Everything was going smoothly. This story caused a strong reaction on the faces of the other girls. However, Lady Tam continued, saying that when she saw this, she ran out of there and hastily accepted the Marquise's proposal. No matter how high his position was, she preferred an old man who had everything in order to a man with a non-working bottom. So Lady Lamona ran away to become the wife of a eunuch, and she became a greedy hillbilly, the wife not of a duke, but of a eunuch. Of course, any man would hug a woman if he were not a eunuch, but now for Laliella, everything fell into place. Duke Elmano went to bed with her every day for a month, but did not show his attraction in any way. Every night the girl was worried and thought that the whole problem was with her, but, as it turned out, this was far from the case. After all, how else can this be explained, if not by the fact that he is a eunuch? It becomes simply impossible to assume anything else. At that same second, the girl was brought out of her thoughts by the voice of Marie, who announced to the mistress that it was time to take a bath. Laliella began to look closely at the servants, trying to understand who was chattering about what was happening between them in the bedroom. She then stood up, asking herself what was the point of this now, and then asked not to add anything to the water. The maid was surprised by such an order, but the Duchess also added that they should bring her regular clothes for sleeping. Also, she does not need any oils or incense, and from tomorrow, she will begin to eat the same as before. Marie tried to convince the lady, but she stood firm and asked her to do as she said. After the bath, she fell on the bed with a smile, thinking that this would be even better, and now she could sleep peacefully. Pulling the blanket, Laliella decided that she would not worry whether he would come or not. Since he was a eunuch, he would not be able to do this. She was pleased that now the entire blanket belonged to her, after which she lay down, instantly removing the smile from her face. She remembered how her guest had said that it was surprising that the Duke was very sorry that Lady Lamona was getting married. As a wedding gift, he sent her a luxurious necklace, and it was because of it that the Marquise gave her a noble thrashing. It seems that even though he is a eunuch, he still wants to marry and embrace a woman, because the last duke was even more of a libertine. He was tired of his father, so he pretended to be noble, but, apparently, he is following the path, because you cannot deceive blood. Laliella didn't even know whether it was true or false, because her attempt to talk to him and find out at least something was unsuccessful. If only he had told everything honestly, she was always ready to listen to him, no matter how terrible the truth was. Towards night, when the Duchess fell asleep, a man entered the room with an uncertain gait, his hands trembling. The Duke believed that Gladys lived happily somewhere there, considered her his family, but as it turned out, he was too carefree. Perhaps he lied to himself because he couldn't stand the torment. Otherwise, it would be difficult to explain such a huge memory loss. But what's most frustrating is that even after learning the truth, he still can't remember how it happened. It also remained an open question why Voklan revealed this from him, apparently wanting him to simply live in ignorance. Until he returns from the domain, Kais will not know the answers to all these questions, but he still cannot stop thinking about it. Then, he firmly decided that he needed to go to Laliella. He needed to somehow justify himself. At least, he found the key to the solution. However, every time he heads to the bedroom, he is enveloped in the suffocating smell that the man loved so much. He always enjoyed his torment. Kays always thought that it brought him incredible satisfaction. Suddenly, he saw in front of him the image of his father, who said that no matter how much he thought about it, it was very strange. He shared a bed with so many women, but none of them became pregnant. But his mother was able to do so. With a stony expression on his face, the Duke politely asked what he meant by this, but all he heard in response was a bag. Coming closer, Drake, with a tired expression on his face, replied that his son, like his wife, did not understand jokes at all. Then he said that his mother was a boring log. He brought all these girls to teach her, but she couldn't do that either. The man smiled, adding that the lady was from the highest aristocracy, and in this regard she was absolutely stupid and ignorant. And his son is not at all like him. He is upset that he completely followed her, without inheriting anything from his own father. Then Drake walked away, asking him to choose, adding that he had brought especially valuable girls today, especially for him. The man asked to prove that he was his son. Kais replied that there was not enough drink, so he would tell the butler to bring more. The guy decided to leave while the man said that he looked like him in face, but never in behavior, which is very sad. Especially his look. No matter how much he pretends that it is not so, deep down, he despises and hates his father. It was the same look as his brothers, who endlessly mocked his easy and riotous lifestyle. Closing the door behind him, Drake said that a little later, he would send him one gift, and he would definitely like it. Drake has disappeared. But as if to strike, he sits inside him and slowly destroys him from the inside. But when will the nightmares come to an end? When he approached the room from which a bright light was coming out, the guy immediately felt a familiar and warm aroma. Entering the room, he noticed Laliella sitting on the windowsill, after which he approached her, awkwardly addressing her. The girl greeted him with a smile, after which she heard the question why she was here. She thought about it before answering. Lowering her head in embarrassment, she replied that there was no need to worry about anything, and that she could take a little rest. The guy didn't know what exactly she was worried about, when suddenly the girl raised her head, asking if he would hug her now. Suddenly, he became excited, after which he turned sharply and blushed, thinking that he was no different from the beast. Standing with his back to Laliella, he apologized to her. I will explain that he still does not have the right to stand in front of her like that, and he cannot hug her in such an undignified place, because he needs to spend the first night in the marital bedroom. The girl took his hand and said that everything is okay. This is the land of Folar, which they both really like. Not wanting to wait, Laliella pulled him towards her, and then embraced him in the long, passionate kiss she had been waiting for. That same night, the girl could not sleep a wink. I remembered the kiss she shared with the Duke, when suddenly she heard strange sounds behind her, which made her feel a little scared, but at the same time curious. Turning around, she was surprised to find the Duke nearby, breathing heavily and tossing and turning violently in his sleep. Rising from her seat, the girl began to examine her husband, trying to remember when he arrived. She wasn't even expecting him, so she didn't immediately realize that it was the Duke. But now she felt a little calmer because of it. Looking at him questioningly, she began to mentally ask why he was constantly moaning, and whether something hurt him. Then she assumed that he was cold, and this is understandable, because she herself was completely wrapped in a blanket, thinking that she was sleeping alone. When suddenly the aroma of grapes hit her nose, after which Laliella realized with displeasure that the Duke was simply drunk. These conclusions made her sad, because she was already anxious, but he drinks and now looks quite calm. Suddenly, she became embarrassed, turning her head away, thinking that he was very handsome even when drunk, but now it was out of place. She understood that this was a strange marriage proposal that she received without even really knowing him. But then the question arose when these fleeting feelings managed to grow so strong because they practically did not communicate. The man who proposed to her and hid the fact that he was a eunuch, because of which everyone is now insulting the entire Fowler family, and her married life becomes completely desperate, so she should hate him, but for some reason she can't. Touching his forehead, the girl thought that her sympathy was still much brighter than hatred, and it was not clear whether this was good. Calling herself a fool, Laliella began to shelter the Duke, displeasedly thinking that even though he was a eunuch, he could also get sick. When suddenly her gaze fell on the bulge that looked out at the Duke from under his shirt, she decided that it was a sword. The Duchess was worried and thought that it would be uncomfortable for him to sleep with the ball between his legs, so we need to help him. But when the girl touched this place, she immediately recoiled, feeling that something was moving there, and it scared her. Then she realized what she had just touched, which made her feel very uneasy while the Duke began tossing and turning. In her sleep, the guy exposed himself in front of her, which is why the girl's face showed shock, because she had never seen anything like this. Covering herself with a blanket, she thought that this is the thing that men have, and when excited, swells and hardens. Covering her head, Laliella blushed deeply, concluding that it was not a sword, but something completely different. She didn't understand why Mulina compared it to a key, because it was even larger than the rolling pin that the nanny used. She began to wonder if it was really entering a woman's body, which then raised the question of whether he was a eunuch. Suddenly, the Duchess's eyes widened when she felt the Duke begin to press himself against her from behind. She felt very awkward when she felt the Duke on her back and did not know what to do in such a situation. Suddenly, her lower abdomen felt warm, while the Duke became even more unrestrained, and she asked him to wait. At that same second, a groan escaped her, after which she covered her mouth with her hand in shock, not expecting something like this from herself. Suddenly, Laliella felt the Duke tremble and then stop, which calmed her down a little. Thinking that the girl was sleeping, Kais rose from his seat and then headed towards the exit, telling himself that he was completely crazy. Rising up, the Duchess watched in surprise as he left, trying to understand what had just happened. There was excitement written all over her face, because she realized that Duke Elmano had no problem with this at all, because of which hundreds of questions began to arise in her head again. She did not understand why this was so and what was wrong with her. The next day, Laliella began studying the books again, while Marie, standing to the side, watched her mistress with concern. The lady ate poorly and spent the whole morning in the library looking for medical reference books that she usually doesn't touch, and the air around her was already heating up from her anger, so she decided that it was better not to touch her over trifles. Suddenly, Marie noticed that she had already drunk all the tea, so she picked up the teapot and thought that she needed to brew a new one. She then decided to contact the Duchess, but there was no response, after which she made a couple more attempts. Laliella didn't want to respond to anything, when suddenly a book hit the table loudly. Ask what the reason was. Not a single book writes why a man with a normal genital organ refuses to sleep with his wife. She will either die of curiosity or burst out of anger and die. Because of this, her mood is simply terrible. Now, she doesn't care about the need to save face as a noble lady, because she has the right to know why he treats her like this. A couple of minutes later, she looked out from behind the tree. I think that he is most likely in the office now, and is definitely busy with work. Looking out of one of the windows, the girl discovered that the Duke was now in the library, which was located under the office. Mr. Vauquelin was also with him, although she heard that he had left on an inspection, but apparently had recently returned. Watching them, Lali wondered who, when looking at them, would even decide that they were cousins. The Duke, with whom everyone has a hard time, and Mr. Vauquelin, who is always kind to everyone, and even outwardly they were very different. Laliella understood that they were complete opposites, but they say that these are the people who are attracted to each other. She noticed that the servants loved Vauquelin. With a character like his, one could get along even with the cold Duke. After this, the girl decided to go to her husband when Mr. Vauquelin left, so as not to interfere with their fraternal conversation. Suddenly, horror appeared on her face when the Duchess noticed that Case grabbed his brother by the shoulders and began to press himself against him. She immediately remembered how the girl said that if a man is not interested in women and is not a eunuch, then he is definitely a homosexual. Grimacing, the girl asked herself why right now she remembered the words of those ladies, because this made her feel uneasy. However, everything was exactly as they said. The Duke does not do this with a woman, But he is not a eunuch either. These two are very close as brothers. But it was difficult to believe that the Duke was a homosexual, and with his cousin. Then Laliella decided that no matter what she thought, this was not so, because this simply could not happen, and it sounded like nonsense. After all, Vauquelin could have simply fallen, and in general, nothing is clear, because from this angle, practically no details are visible. Although the Duke is cold, not very talkative, and sometimes annoying, he is not the person who could deceive her like that. She remembered that she had observed such a scene at the ball, where she and the Duke first crossed paths, where the two hid from prying eyes. I only understood that it was not an easy kiss, but a kiss filled with desire and involvement in each other. The man pressed the girl against the wall, and the girl wrapped her arms around his neck. It was clearly visible that they madly desired each other. And now these men found themselves in the same position, even though the Duke had his back to her. The two pictures were very similar. She remembered Vauquelin's words that he had never seen the Duke smile, even in front of attractive ladies. Laliella began to shake as she realized that last night the Duke had a dream with Mr. Vauquelin, which is why he did this to her. Involuntarily, she looked at someone who didn't even want to hug her, and she never really held a grudge against anyone. Hearing talk about how he fucked, she got angry and hated him, but on the other hand, she felt sorry for him. Half an hour later, Laliella was sitting at the table, deciding to write a letter to her brother and Melina to tell them everything. With a flushed face and tears in her eyes, the Duchess thought that now there was no need for all this. Now she could allow her brother to scold her for her selfishness, but she was no longer able to prolong this suffering. Having finished with the letter, she without hesitation handed it to Marie so that she could send it to the barony of Folar as soon as possible. Last night, when all this happened, the Duke woke up, surprised to find Laliella next to him. He had a dream with her participation. When he realized this, he began to ask when he managed to come here, because he did not remember anything. He reproached himself for coming here drunk, and he also had a similar obscene dream right next to Laliella. Then he stood up from his seat, thinking that if she saw him like this, there would be problems. But he really is the worst husband. Looking at the girl who was completely wrapped in a blanket, the guy thought that she was still very cute at any time, and this dizzying smell became weaker. Perhaps due to the fact that she was completely wrapped in a blanket. He asked her to wait a little longer to make this dream come true, and he would have to talk to Vauquelin. Before dinner, the Duke's cousin stood in the square and did pull-ups, glad that he had finally returned home. He imagined that he would first go home and soak in the bath, and in the evening, he would drop by his favorite pub with a beautiful girl. When suddenly one of the soldiers noticed the Duke, Vauquelin turned his head and saw a disgruntled brother walking in his direction. The guy was glad at first that he came out to meet him, but Kai silently grabbed his hand and dragged him along. While in the library, Vauquelin asked what happened, because no matter how urgent the matter was, he could have been given a rest. The Duke said that if he wanted to leave here as quickly as possible, he must tell him everything he knew about Gladys. At that very second, the displeasure on his brother's face gave way to surprise when he asked why he was suddenly asking about this. Caius asked not to pretend that he was not in the know, because Wallace said that he knew everything. Vauquelin decided that his memory had returned. The Duke replied that it seemed that the reason he had not yet been able to spend the first night lay in those memories. The brother frowned, pondering his words, and then said that he understood that their marriage was not for love. But does he want to say that while he was gone for 2 weeks, nothing has changed? And what does Gladys have to do with it? Caius asked displeasedly why he thought their marriage was without love. Someone replied that it couldn't be otherwise with him. Is it wise to marry a woman with whom I did not even exchange greetings? And the first night was not spent due to lack of feelings. The Duke almost started shouting when he said that he really couldn't, after which he decided to calm down a little. He then said more calmly that something happens to him when he walks into the bedroom and he can't do anything. Laliella did everything in preparation for her wedding night, but he can't even really stand in the bedroom, let alone sleep. If he runs out into the corridor, unable to bear it, he sees illusions with Drake, after which he immediately begins to choke. It is so painful that you have to drown it out with alcohol, although this only helps for a short period of time. All the doctors say that everything is physically fine and the problem is in his head, but they have not been able to find the cause. That is why Vauquelin must tell everything he knows, and now the Duke is ready for anything to solve the problem. The brother frowned again, after which he rubbed his face with his hand, realizing that he would now begin to tell not the most pleasant things. When Caius was 20 years old, the imperial family organized hunting competitions for the heirs every 2 years. And that day, he learned for the first time that his father was importing various substances and using them for his parties. But the worst thing was that it was he who managed all the affairs of the duchy on behalf of his wasteful father. As a result, it turned out that he signed documents for the purchase of various substances under the guise of trading funds. The imperial family did not accept the greetings from the Elmano family, as their trade machinations quickly came to light, and the proud heirs of other families openly ridiculed and criticized him, although this was not the Duke's fault. In their eyes, he was his accomplice. That day he returned home covered in mud from head to toe and got drunk for the first time. Vauquelin said that on that day, Drake, seeing him drunk, said that Gladys would wait on him in the bedroom. Caius was a little surprised, but still could not connect any logical chain of everything that happened. The brother continued, saying that on his orders, she was bathed as a bride before her wedding night and anointed with fragrant oils. After she was dressed in light clothes, Drake made Gladys a bride, and then sent her to Caius's bedroom. So at first, this girl went not to the Duke's bedroom, but to his, and for a second, memories began to return. He remembered how this girl straddled him, then kissed him tenderly, while her eyes glowed with desire. He remembered the first time he felt bad when he saw a girl sitting on top of him asking if he liked him. Gladys took his hand and asked him to touch her. Fear immediately came over the guy, after which he scaredly pushed her away. Starting to choke, he turned his head in her direction, asking what she was doing and how she could do this to him. As a result, he kicked her out, and after some time, with the help of his father, he discovered her body, which was hanging in the middle of her bedroom. Stunned by these memories, the Duke asked his cousin in horror why he didn't tell him about this. After all, no matter how shocking this event was, he should have known that it was much better than keeping something like this from him. He could have told at any time, but he preferred that his brother remain in the dark and suffer because of it. Vauquelin frowned, answering dissatisfiedly that if he had discovered her by chance, after sobering up, then he would definitely have told her. Confusion immediately appeared on the Duke's face as he asked what he was talking about and how he ended up discovering her. Vauquelin didn't know whether to talk about it, but he still said that Drake specifically called him and forced him to see it. This rumor was well known to everyone. The Elmano family served as an excellent example for all other aristocrats. But she had one drawback and the biggest shame when his uncle, who headed the family, died in an accident. One person, long before the funeral began, gave a large share to the imperial palace and temple as a donation. Then he appropriated the ducal title to himself, so that the family could not do anything about it, and he emerged victorious. This was Duke Drake Elmano, who had a small son, Caius, who, due to his age, still did not understand anything. At such a young age, he didn't care about politics or the things his father did when he was Duke. Instead of the Duke, calm even under contemptuous glances, it was the child who was tormented by remorse. Caius looked at Vauquelin, but then only looked away, which caused tears of sadness to well up in the boy's eyes.